Welcome, listeners. In today's episode of Future Secured, Jason and I are joined by Casey Ellis, the founder and chairman of Bugcrowd, one of the pioneers in crowdsourced security. With over 20 years of experience in information security and entrepreneurship, Casey is a key figure in reshaping how cybersecurity is approached today. He created the crowdsourced security as a service model, revolutionizing how organizations protect their digital assets by tapping into the power of global ethical hackers. Now, Casey, you're a thought leader, and today we're really looking forward to you sharing how crowdsourcing is transforming the security industry and how Bugcrowd's model is helping top Fortune 500 companies stay secure, and also really diving into that entrepreneurial journey and giving some tips to, the Australian cyber founders out there. So thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you for joining me as always, Jason, and over to you for the first question, Jason.
Tom, great intro. And Casey, we've been really looking forward to getting you on, mate. It's always good, the conversations we've had in a private setting, but to get you on here to really share and hopefully spread the message as wide as possible. And I know that you always have strong opinions on things, which is something we always invite on here. And I get lambasted for all the time. So it's good to have someone who supports it. Yeah, so from your point of view, mate, and just to give the listeners, Tom's given a pretty good intro there just on your background, but could you sort of fill in a few of the gaps, or, he sort of put the outline there, just give a little bit of colouring pencil in for some of the bits, and, sort of how this sort of came about, what you were doing before you got here, and then that sort of journey, because it's been an interesting one on so many fronts.
Yeah, for sure. Look, I think the probably like hello, thank you for having me.
Firstly, hi Casey, how you going?
From an interest standpoint, thanks Tom. That was very kind as an intro, and you too, Jason. So basically, best known as the founder of Bugcrowd. I'm also the co-founder of the Disclose.io project. These days, I'm doing a fair bit around advisory and kind of angel type work with cybersecurity entrepreneurs across the board, and that really kicked off maybe 5 or 6 years into Bugcrowd, but we've kind of ramped it up lately on account of a few different things. But yeah, from a background standpoint, I started Bugcrowd in Australia. And part of the deal there was really thinking about it. When I had the idea for it, it's like, okay, this is either going to catch on fire and fail, because it, in 2012, end of 2011, 2012, when we were starting to work on it, the idea of ethical hackers actually, like hacking being an agnostic skill set, a morally agnostic skill set. Like you've got locksmiths and burglars, they both know how to break into stuff. It's just one does it for harm and the other does it for good. Like the digital equivalent of that really wasn't well understood at that point in time. So, with the entrepreneur hat on, it's like, all right, we've got this problem of outsmarting the adversary. They look like a crowd with lots of different skill sets, lots of different motivations, and really an incentive for success. Meanwhile, we're trying to compete with that, with people being paid by the hour, and they can be like the smartest pen testers or ethical hackers in the world, but they're going to fail eventually because the math is wrong. Right. In the meantime, you've got this incredible community of people like myself who like enjoy thinking like criminals, but don't want to be criminal. Right. Who were fundamentally just unplugged from the fight. So I was kind of looking at that thinking that's a stupid problem for us to have. Like we should try to fix that. The other side of that is that having grown up in the hacker community, the side effect of the internet in general, not understanding that some of us are here to help, is that we were basically treated as criminal that entire time. So the other kind of chip on my shoulder I had was to try to change the operating environment for hackers that work in good faith. So that was sort of the ingredients in the mix. I've been in security pretty much my entire career. Grew up hacking as a kid, got into pen testing pretty much straight out of high school, and kind of went from there. And yeah, as I said, like when we kick the idea off, it's like, all right, this is either going to catch on fire and fail, or it's going to move at 1,000,000 miles an hour. If it does the latter, we're going to want to be in the valley, where there's early adopters, where there's access to capital, mentorship, all those different things. And I think to me at that point in time, and still today, when I talk to other entrepreneurs about it, it's sort of like being an actor and going to Hollywood. You know what I mean? Like there's nothing really that special about this place other than the fact that it's been doing it the longest. So you end up with the most mature kind of set of infrastructure and community to be able to work with and to be able to actually get help from as a founder trying to do a crazy thing.
Yeah, I think that's the first point right there is exactly one of the key points, isn't it? Is that, and this is something that I'm sure we'll unpack a bit here, but in Australia we just don't have that maturity at all, and this is where we have so many founders having to go offshore,
Mm.
mainly and
Mm.
often to the valley, and I'm sort of finding a bit more now. There's other parts of the US which are starting to sprout, and because getting into the area where you're at is very expensive, right? Like it's not cheap to get there. So
Yeah.
this is the sort of stuff we really want to help the sort of startup community with, because as I've sort of said to you before, Casey, and Tom knows, and I've mentioned on here before, we're about to set up a fund, which is about $100 million fund here in Australia, which is for cybersecurity, AI, and for quantum. So we've got all the backing from Antler and other VCs and stuff like that will participate in that. But we're sort of reversing that model round and where we'd seen the issue here before is we're saying the main CISO, so like we've got Dan Maslin, just say Ben Doyle and all those sort of ones that will sit around
Yep.
the table and hopefully, we can get someone like yourself involved that say, here's the wicked problems that need to be solved right now, not in 10, 15 years time, but what do we
Yep.
need to solve for right now? Let's
Yep.
build that and get that sandbox environment and get that happening really quickly and get it 12 weeks and actually start making sales in off the back of it. So a 12-week entrepreneur in residence program, get them on there and get the teams that we actually find the key people, because this is where and you've done it so well, like as you've grown and been able to find really good CEOs and others in the business, because you need to fill those gaps. You can't be everything yourself. So
100%.
from your point of view, because you've learned the hard way, it is the school of hard knocks, literally. I mean, and I know from having the conversations that we've both had from growing businesses and raising hundreds of millions of dollars, all that sort of stuff.
It's not all stuff that ends up in TechCrunch, that's for sure.
No, that's right. And this what I wanted to sort of unpack is because people see the end journey and they go, well, just say we started whiskey, it was 17 years to be an overnight success, right? From starting that business in 2007 to getting at the other end, and still it's got challenges now, with the market and everything like that. And there's always something new comes up which is challenging, and so can you just give us and the listeners a bit of an idea on that, because it isn't all rainbows all the way through, and there's lots of challenges, and you get hit with, like you started off the back of probably GFC sort of happening, in that sort of 11, 12 sort of period as things were starting to pick up again. But you go through, COVID and all these different things and capital raising. So anything you want to sort of unpack there and just give us some brass tacks on?
Yeah, there's a lot of, there's a lot of different directions I can go on that.
Go anywhere you want.
Yeah, and yeah, you're right. Like I didn't. I started working on Bugcrowd end of 2011, but I actually broke bad into entrepreneurship in 2008, like right in the middle of the GFC. And like that was honestly scarier than starting Bugcrowd, because that was sort of me for the first time transitioning from salaried employment to like hunt and kill what you eat. And with a family and all those different things, it's like you can't afford to screw that up. But the upside of it is that I'd sort of done that part the hard way. I actually do believe that downturns are good for security.
Phoenix rises from the ashes.
Well, if you're solving an actual problem, right? The thing is that it's difficult to talk about risk in a way that people internalize when it's all sunshine and rainbows outside. Like when you've got like a real sense of like, no, some of this stuff might be a real kind of threat or a real problem. Like, how do we pragmatically approach trying to think about it and solve it? Like, it's a lot easier to have those sorts of conversations when it's a bit dark and stormy outside, right? So I think that's probably actually a fairly salient point for today's entrepreneurs, because we are like heading very much into a period like that. I would argue that we're already a fair way into it, and we're just kind of starting to realize. But I do think that the idea of like global conflicts, like economic shifts, all these different things that create this like threat-oriented business environment, like that's going to ramp up. So to be able to come into something like that with empathy, like not to chase the ambulance, so to speak, and not pitching fun, but to be able to say, hey, here are the things that might be kind of critical from a priority standpoint that you're having difficulty solving. Like, can I help you with that? Can you help me understand what you need? And let's find ways to grow together. It's actually a really good time to do that, I think. Which is completely counterintuitive. Like a lot of my kind of cautionary tales come from doing stuff that people look at from the outside and they're like, what the hell were you thinking? Because it just seems very contrarian almost. But a lot of it had a lot of logic behind it. A lot of it had like a degree of like faith in the outcome behind it. So far so good.
What are those a couple of those cautionary tales and things where you've actually kind of really kind of learned some tips, and I can
Yeah,
understand that transfer to hunt and kill as you describe it. I've only been doing that with Jason for a little over a year, and for me, I was
good for
fortunate.
you
I
though.
spent a lot of time running around the world with the camera,
Yeah.
so I had a lot of amazing experiences. But I was locked into a pay-as-you-go mindset. I was
Yep.
brought up in that way, and it's probably the biggest struggle, and one of the places where Jason has to bang me over the head the most. Is kind of getting out of that kind of stuff. So, but more broader for the kind of listeners we've got, the cyber CEOs and that who are out there trying to make that. What are some lessons you can share?
Yeah. So I would say, I mean, lessons in leadership. Um, One of the things that became obvious fairly quickly that sort of wasn't intuitive at the outset is that your job as a founder is basically to do everything.
Mm,
Your job as a CEO or as an executive leader as you scale is to get as close to doing nothing as you can, if that makes sense.
mm,
And that's no, CEOs do a lot. It's no disrespect. I've had that role for 7 years, and it's a lot. And a lot of respect to Dave, who's got the CEO seat within
mm,
Bugcrowd right now. But ultimately, his job isn't so much getting into the middle of all of the different things. It's actually to delegate, to abstract, to make sure there's enough money in the bank, make sure the right people are doing the right things, and make sure that everyone knows where the North Star is at any given point in time. Like that to me is kind of the fundamental. If you're doing much more than that as a CEO, you got to ask yourself the question why.
mm,
For a founder who's passionate about the problem that they're solving and is kind of a nerd for all of it, um, abstracting back to that place is a really that can be a really counterintuitive process. I I think had the good fortune to get exposed to a lot of mentors that had been successful in actually making that transition through like Startmate and Rally Ventures over here in the US who came in on our Series Seed. Um, so I got to listen to that. I'm also a big believer in mentorship. So when I heard that kind of advice repeated over and over again from different places, I'm like, there's probably something in that I need to dig
mm,
into, and I kind of had a bit of a heads up. But I found that difficult. It's just being in a position to be able to actually let go of things that I'm deeply passionate about, and then let the people that I've hired to be better at that thing than I am go
mm,
do their thing. There's just always that's just a lather rinse repeat journey, and it never stops. I don't
mm,
think. I think the more you scale, the more parts of the business you need to actually find ways to move out of from a direct kind of management standpoint and shift yourself into more of a leadership position on that. So that's a fun one. I think the other one that I'd call out is just, and this has been a more recent one. Making sure that you're taking care of yourself from like a health standpoint.
mm,
I was fairly open about it because it was kind of a big deal that I wasn't able to hide, and there was no reason
mm,
not to talk about it. I actually ended up having open heart surgery midway through last year. I had a genetic condition that we thought I'd gotten away with, but discovered that I hadn't. Basically, had a valve that had failed in my heart, and it had been that way for quite some time. But because I was so focused on executing and like expecting stress and expecting to feel a bit run down and a bit shitty from time to time, I just chalked it all up to that.
mm.
Had I gone on doing that much longer, it probably would have been a different outcome.
Yeah.
So I think as a cautionary tale that I'm sharing whenever I get the opportunity, it's like make sure that you're looking after yourself, make sure that you're staying ahead of things. We're taking on big giants on big hills with what we do here. Even just running a business is a big thing in and of itself before you throw
Mm.
bad guys and cybersecurity and geopolitics and AI and God knows what else on top. But just
Yeah.
being very deliberate about making sure that you're staying on top of that, knowing that it'll catch up with you if you don't. I think that's a really important. That's a
Yeah,
lesson
that was big. Yeah, that was
I've
you
learned the hard
sharing
way
that.
over the past 12
Yeah,
months.
you sharing that was really good, I think. And that's what I said. I remember seeing the picture, like when you're in there, and I can imagine
Yeah,
that scar down there is still a constant reminder every time you're getting changed or whatever that that is something
100%.
that you can't forget it. It's not like it's not like something that
Yeah.
is not there every day, right? But that is the thing is, and I said I don't know, and most entrepreneurs I know it's 25/8, right? You don't have a there's no off switch. You know, you're dreaming about, you think about it, you wake up thinking about business and all that sort of stuff, and it's constantly in your head.
Yep.
Now you're doing what you've done. You've got great people, you know, running your business and Bugcrowd, and now you've
Mhm.
transitioned into the other side of the fence where you're sort of looking to being that mentor now and imparting those lessons. What are you looking for in businesses if you've got a checklist of the top 3 or 5 things you sort of look for or are on the lookout for? And you know, I know a lot of the stuff we talk about is often invest in people. You know, the
Yeah.
people or the founders are such a key thing. Is that
Yeah.
are they going to take it through? Because most people are half-assed about doing it. It's like almost to the point of, if we go on health, would you die to make this happen? Sort of thing is to the extent that you got to look for, and how
Yeah.
passionate, how smart, and who else is in that team. But what are you sort of looking for in that sort of top 3 or 5, Casey, that you really look for that are key for you?
Yeah. 100%. I think, yeah, on the founder side, like people that are just irrationally pissed off about the problem that they think that they can solve, like that to me is
Yep.
the definition of a founder. It's because the nuance in there is the irrational part. It's actually not irrational because
Mm,
their experience in the domain, their understanding of the problem solution fit, their like problem empathy on the buyer side, all those different things. Um, is such that it's like, no, that actually might be worth doing and you might be able to pull that off. But to
yep.
the outside, their conviction about what a better future could look like looks to the rest of the world like it's basically irrational. Do you know what I
Yeah, yeah.
mean? Um,
Well, sometimes I think on that, just on that point there, before we go to the next one, is I
sure.
think that's where you get that mismatch, don't you? Is that you have an eyes. I've often done it with other businesses. I have this clear vision of where I think it's going to be and what it can be, and you
Yep.
ultimately create that, and then everyone gives you a pat on the back. But at the start, they're all like, "You're an absolute freaking nut job,
You're a
and you're an
lunatic.
idiot,
This
and there's
is
no
not
way
gonna work.
that's
Yeah.
ever going to happen."
Yeah. I mean,
Yeah,
I heard that for 3 years.
you would have,
I heard
yeah.
that for probably 2 years before Bugcrowd raised its pre-seed, and I heard it for
Mm,
probably 3 years afterwards as we were out there convincing the market that hackers aren't all evil.
yeah,
Um,
Mm.
and we got it done, but yeah, like you've you've got to be in a position where it's like, no, I actually have such a strong conviction around the fact that this is going, like, between now and the heat death of the universe, this is going to be the way that things are done, and I think
yeah.
now is the right time, and I think I am the right person to do it. Like
Mm,
those three things together, to me, that's kind of what I look for in founders. Plus, honestly, humility, like intellectual honesty, like people that aren't, jerks, frankly,
mm,
because there are a bunch of those that bounce around, people that kind of come in with the entrepreneur,
yep.
thing, and like the ego vibe.
Mm,
It's a heady trip, and I think even that side of it, being able to manage, the different pulls on your ego as you go through the process, especially if it starts to work. Like
mm,
if you're a bit of a jerk going into it, you're going to turn into a massive jerk,
yep.
if it starts to work, and that's going to create problems down the track. So that's
And
on
the
the people
reverse is
side.
true too. The reverse is true. Like you as a person, as I've seen you grow into it, you've grown into being a much better person. Like I think from being that, it's actually
I appreciate
expanded,
that.
and then the people you surround yourself with, you attract the right people into your business as well. So anyone you meet, like when we were at RSA last year, your stand, the people that work on it, but anything you get feedback wise too from customers like Dan Maslin, obviously a customer of yours down at Monash Uni, just
Hmm.
how highly they speak of you, the product, and all that sort of stuff. So that's universal. You're obviously going to have people that haters, and that's always
Oh
the
yeah,
case. You get people
you
that
can't
you
make
have that.
everyone happy. Is the flip side to that, but yes,
Yeah,
100%.
and yeah,
It's
you've
important.
got to wear that though. Is that when you're doing something this good, that you will get people that will take pot shots, right? So that's the other
100%.
side of it. But
Yeah.
you've just got to ignore that and just know that when you're doing the stuff and you're doing it for the right reason, that you'll go through these hard times, and you just got to not listen to the people who are actually taking pot shots, because usually they're just low level people that are just more jealous of anything else than anything
Or they don't
to
have
move you forward.
division. Yeah,
Yeah,
like the jealousy piece, like my my the basically umbrella kind of consultancy that I've done all of this stuff under over the years, and continue to today, is called the Tall Poppy Group.
yeah, absolutely.
And part of
Mm,
the reason for that is that sort of that jealousy and that sort of sense of like, oh, you can't. Who do you think you are? Like that. Da da da
mm,
da. Um, Americans don't really do that, but
no,
Australians
Mm.
definitely do in a big
massive.
way, and I
Yeah,
think there's a
yeah.
lot of other countries that do it as well. I've sort of learnt that since I've
UK.
moved
Mm,
here, UK, Canada.
mm.
There seems to be a common theme there, but we won't go into that.
Yeah.
We're coming through. But
We can, mate. That's the thing. Get into it.
Bloody
Not any of us.
royals.
leave it to the historians, right? But yeah, I mean, yeah. Anyway, that idea of that sort of like not wanting to push too hard for fear of getting kind of pulled back into the, like your crabs in a bucket and one tries to get
Yep.
out and the other one's pull it back in, like that whole thing.
Yep. Yep.
That's a big one for Aussie founders to deal with, because you're just gonna have to live with that shit. Like, it's stupid, it's irrational, but if you let it, and I think one part of it is that there can be signal in there. Like, if you're hearing enough haters in a particular direction, it's like, all right, is there anything that's usable in what they're saying, right? But completely differentiating that from like, that person doesn't like me, I must be terrible, and kind of letting it get into your soul at that point. You know what I mean? Like, you got to guard against that stuff. That's a big thing. And again, it's hard. That's always a battle, right? Because you want to stay humble, you want to stay open, you want to stay teachable, but at the same time, you got to develop this resilience around what you're doing that only gets tested more and more as you go along.
And you said about your family too, and this is a thing I think for a lot of people to consider, is that sometimes, being a founder or trying to do startups when you're single or you don't have the family aspect to it, there is, some people go, oh, well, I'll do it while that, but doing moving the family overseas, and then, your kids are going to school over in the US and all that sort of stuff as well. That's a big decision to make as well. So, as an Aussie founder, how do they know when the right time is to transition into the market, or when would you say, because that's I know it's going to be a bit of a difficult question to ask, but when do you know it's the right time no matter what? Because, and I think this is and I'll probably two-part this question. Also, if you fuck it up, you'll learn so much from it that you can go back and do it again, right? And this is something we'll do with this program. If it's a 12-week program, it's almost survival of the fittest. The business that makes it the end to solve the solution goes. But those people are still in the pool for the next one that might not have been a good CEO for that business, but the next one that comes through the sausage factory, they might be, right? So when did you pick that? And also, that probably part two of that sort of question is then also, the selection process, or when you're building your team, when do you know when to let go of what parts, because as you said, you're the CFO, you're the CEO, you're the COO, you're the product developer, you're everything at the start.
Chairman.
Well, board kicks in, like that's a fun one.
Because
if you haven't done that before, you learn a lot, like, very quickly.
And cap raising, all the stuff, right? Like, what you cap raising, what you're doing in business, because it takes away so much effort. Dilution.
US law, Australian law, like, it's
wet us
a lot.
up in the US.
So back to the first thing, I think, I mean, to founders thinking it through, like, now is the right time. Because realistically, like, cybersecurity is definitely getting pressure from kind of the macroeconomic environment, but we've still got a pretty healthy, like a healthily low unemployment rate in our industry. And like, the reality, part of what was in the back of my head starting Bugcrowd was like, if this thing fails, then I just go back to Australia, get a management consulting job at a Big Four or whatever. I, like, hate life because that's not what I want to be doing, right? But
you got fallback.
Like, I've blogged on this a couple of times. The idea of, like, knowing what your keep lights on option looks like, and then to be able to basically stare that thing in the face until it blinks first. Like, once you can do that, I think you're ready to go. Because it has to be rational, but it has to be kind of irrational to some degree as well, like we were saying before. The other side of it is just, having your spouse, having your family on board. Like, I was really fortunate in that respect, because it's something that my wife and I have been talking about for quite a long time, just in general around business, but then also, like, living somewhere else. So when this became an option, it's like, are we good? Like, all right, let's do it. And we kind of, I'd already done some of the pre-work on that. And to be fair, like, Viv was kind of pulling pretty hard in that direction as well. So, like, we're kind of ready to go. I've seen enough founders, successful ones and unsuccessful ones, like, just completely trash their family in doing this, and not really having wanted to do that going into it, to know that, like, that's I was actually in hindsight, very kind of fortunate and blessed to be able to operate with that. And that's not to say it's been easy. Like there's been periods
No.
where it's got really difficult on that side. Not to go too deep into it, but
Mm.
you do hard things and it puts pressure on everything, and you've got to manage
Yeah.
that pressure as you go along. So,
And
you know,
financially too, and that's the thing. I think, yeah, Casey, the financial aspect, right? So I've
yeah,
done it before where I've fucked up stuff where, I went hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars in deep on a business, and I was putting on personal credit cards and all that sort of
yeah,
stuff, and putting,
yeah,
against the house and all that sort of stuff. And when that goes the wrong way, and this was, early 2000 stuff, that it's not a good look when it unhinges, and then you're putting a lot of people at risk, like, and I had a young kid at the time, all that sort of stuff. It's just, when it does go bad, and it's not always your fault, but you got to take that into account, and as you say, you got to have the downside risk of what does that look like. And that
yeah,
that other part of the question just on that is, when do you know when to get people into your business? So Bugcrowd, what did
yeah.
you guys raise that last year? It was like 100 mil or something like that to
100,
make it $1 billion company?
102, yeah,
Yeah,
102 at the
102.
beginning of the year, yeah,
Yeah,
which
and
was
then
pretty
that was
amazing.
great at, RSA last year. That's, I think, we're round of applause there. And also, the fact is that that was a great going to RSA and saying, I felt proud as an Aussie to say that this is with
Yeah,
sort of a born and bred person coming out of Australia and seeing the stand
Australian
there
story,
and
yeah.
everything. And yeah, it was just awesome to see that. But also for the people listening who are growing their businesses, how do you
Mhm.
know when to replace yourself in each of those different ones? So, I always found for myself the financial aspect, if you get someone good financially, or like I had a good accountant slash CFO, to sort of take that off the plate, because that's one of the first things you want to sort of offload. Still keep an eye on your numbers, but have
Yeah.
someone who actually looks after that. But also the sales aspect, no one can ever sell as good as the person who's actually made the product. So how do you make that process in play? And
Yeah.
what was your sort of advice in when you're growing a business? Because often we just said throw more salespeople at it, but you need good salespeople, right, to
I
grow the
actually
sales. There's
I
that
actually
balance.
I actually violently disagree with that
Yeah.
advice as a side note.
'Cause I was going to say, yeah, there's one thing. It was like I was looking at, just say, Wiz, and it was who got picked up by Fortinet. It was Lacework, right?
Yep.
Lacework were really probably more on engineers and less on salespeople. And Wiz are more on salespeople, less on engineers. But they got picked up by Google, for a bigger amount because they were going
Yep.
on the sales aspect. So yeah, I'd like to get your thing on that, because that's often the thing is, throw more salespeople at it, or do you want to
No,
make your product better, right?
there's
So
there's so much in that. So in terms
yeah.
of knowing, like, just going back to the start of the question, like knowing when to replace yourself, to me that's always a question of, like, what am I good at? And then,
Mm,
like, where do I need the help? What are the things that I should be handing over? Like, what are the things that I desperately need to hand over because I suck at them? Because
yeah.
that's, an obvious place to start. And for everyone, that's going to be a little bit different. Like, I love the sales part. I love marketing. I'm not
Mm,
strong on the admin side of things. I'm not necessarily that strong on, like, I get the finance piece, but the discipline of, like, getting everything through and done, and hygiene, all those sorts of things, that's just not something that I'm naturally wired up necessarily that well to do. So I
yeah.
know that I don't get a pass. If I'm in the CEO seat, I don't get a pass on that stuff because I'm still the one
Yeah.
who goes to jail if I screw it up, right?
Mm, yeah.
Um, but um, that's what it is. But
Mm,
ultimately, it's like, okay, that's going to be one of my early hires to bring in to make sure that the financial and the business administration of the company is operating well.
mm,
And probably the other side is that, like, I'm a technologist and I'm a nerd from way back, but I'm not a platform engineer. Like, I'm a good
mm,
product guy and I understand enough about technology to really annoy true, like, engineering technologists, right? But
yeah.
I'm not a builder in that sense. So
Mm,
um, finding someone to be able to take that part on so I can focus on the things that I'm strong at and allow them to focus on the things that they're strong at. Like, to me, early stage team building, if you're doing it right, it looks like these sort of, like, series of Venn circle overlaps. As you go further along, as your team evolves, like, your skill set's going to evolve,
mm,
your understanding of what's actually needed in the business is going to evolve. Your understanding of, like, on the finance side, okay, all of a sudden we're now talking about, cap tables and venture debt
mm,
management and, like, the interface between legal and finance and all this other stuff. Oh, okay, cool. Like, do I want to become an expert in that, or is that something that I should pass off and try to find a way to fill out in the team? Like, every person's going to have it. Like, that particular area is a part of all of this that fascinates me for some
Yeah.
weird reason, because the financial mechanics of it are just wild.
Mm.
So, I wanted to hold on to some of that stuff, but then figuring out who's going to actually do the groundwork. It's just a continuing, it's always going back and looking at that and making sure you got the right people in the right place, and
Mm.
that any gaps that are in the business are being filled. Then as a leader, it's knowing, what are the 3 or 4 things that, like, if anyone takes you to the mat, you're going to win because you're world class.
Yeah.
And then being completely humble and completely open to input with, like, literally anything that isn't those 3 or 4 things.
Mm. Yeah, I think that's it, and that's a great point that you raise, and that's full agreement with that. Is always double down on the stuff you're really strong at as
Yeah.
well. And I think sometimes as a founder, you can sometimes get stuck on trying to focus on stuff. I really should be better with the financials. So, I mean, Richard Branson has no idea on financials, period.
No.
And
Yeah.
look what he's built, right? But if you've got good people you can trust around you that can look after that sort of stuff, which I've been lucky, like my accountant Warren, I've had since doing a lot of startups, and he understands, that this structure and how we're going to run it and all that sort of stuff. And he's the sort of guy that he's done stuff. He's listed his own companies in the US and stuff like that as well. So it's like he's got that sort of that mindset. And I think he's been inspired by dealing with other sort of entrepreneurs and stuff that it's actually he's
Yep.
got a very successful business, but he knows how it operates and how the brain works and all that sort of stuff. And so I intro him, and it's just a very closed network, but it's that we all understand each other. And then when you've got someone that you can trust and say, they'll just look after it, I don't even have to think about that now. I can
Yeah.
just focus on doing the stuff I'm good at.
That's the
That's
dream
your key
state.
thing, isn't it? Yeah, that's the
If,
ideal
if
thing
you
is you
if you
get
if you can get it to that point where it's like, what, just check back in with me once the thing is done.
yep,
And then, to the point of, like, building your weaknesses, having enough operating knowledge of what the thing is to be able to actually validate that, and
yeah,
not
correct.
be, like, blindly trusting that, because
Hmm.
especially again in the CEO seat, like, you need to understand what's going on, because you're ultimately on the hook, right?
That's it. Yeah,
But there's this balancing act between building up enough knowledge to be conversant about a thing, and, like, refusing to become an expert in any area that's not your strong suit. Because
yeah,
I just fundamentally don't. I'm always learning in, like, a million different directions. That's just part of how I'm wired up.
mm,
Um, but I'm not a strong believer in this idea of, like, focus on your weaknesses and try to
yeah.
improve them, because it's like, well, then your strengths get ignored and you're not using them. And if you're, like, 1x here and 10x here, then, like, why are you spending time on the 1x? That doesn't make
That's
sense.
it. Yeah, and that's where I think people get caught up. And so, yeah, 100% with that is that you see, and that's where a lot of founders lose their focus. But also, and it can be through going through cap raises and stuff like that, you so fixate on that, you forget about your business. The thing that you're actually trying to actually raise the capital for actually starts to drop sales and drop all the things because you're actually too fixated on something that, has
Well,
to happen. But,
and
there's that balance on those two as well.
let's be real on that, because going to your Wiz Lacework
Mm,
comparison before, I think Wiz definitely had a lot of help around them from, like, if you look at their enterprise value track, through the life of the company, like, there was they were putting a lot of work into capital raising. um
100% they were. Yeah.
yeah, and
Mm,
not just the sales side, they actually also managed to have a decent product in the mix as well.
yeah,
So I think they got
absolutely.
that part right. They figured out when to crank the handle on the sales side, for better or for worse. And then
Mm,
they had this revalue the company at whatever milestones they could, to be able to show
mm,
this enterprise value growth curve that made them, whatever it was, a $32 billion target for Google at the end of the day.
mm.
Lacework maybe didn't do that quite as much, so they weren't as
No.
focused on that financial engineering component. Is one right and one wrong? Like, depends on what game you want to play. Like, to me,
Yeah, and also it depends on the long-term game as well. Is that
yeah,
we're looking at it at this point in time, and as you say, who's right, who's wrong, and it depends again what your goal is and what you're trying to do with your business, and
yeah,
that comes to motivation, and especially if you're an engineer who started a business compared to someone who might be more sales orientated or sales and marketing orientated too, can
yeah.
actually have an effect on how a business actually operates, and yeah, I think the longevity of your business is something that I think people need to dip the lid to. Is that the balance you found with that is and there's never any perfection, but I think the balance that you've actually got with the way you've done things, and even from cap raising and all the other stuff that you've done, has
Mm.
actually you've seemed to found that really decent midpoint where you got a really nice balance between the growth
Yeah, I
the
appreciate
capital
that.
coming in and what you've done. But
Yeah,
I this was something I've done for a job since early 2000s, from capital raising, all that sort of stuff in businesses, and that's why I've admired you. And first time I met, that's what I said. The first thing was that your business and just the model and what you've come up with is. And I know there's people try and copy all those sorts of things, but there's only certain things you can copy from the outside. The inside of a business is what counts, the heart that beats, so to speak, if you'll pardon the
yeah,
pun, but is what actually drives it. And sometimes I think without knowing that, what the secret sauce is, you can still try and copy the kernel or make your special sauce. But if it's in a business, it's hard to actually get that exact recipe, and you've got it,
yeah. No,
on all
I,
fronts.
I appreciate that, and honestly, full credit goes to the team for actually executing on that stuff as well. Because
Team
again,
you
like
built, yeah.
this point of stepping back on different things and letting the team actually do that. Like with the founder hat on, it's a weird thing because like it's like you'll always be its parent.
Mm,
There's sort of like foundational DNA, and this is something that I've seen all sorts of different places and definitely see it at Bugcrowd. Like your fingerprints are just always going to be there because that's the founding kind of DNA of the company, and it grows on top of that, right?
yeah.
Um, I think there was a lot of things that we put a lot of priority on in the early days that were directionally spot on to what we were doing, and that's cool. I can take credit for that in terms of getting it rolling, but then it's to Dave's credit and the team's credit at this point in time for actually finding ways to scale that and grow that, and see General Catalyst come in and put 102 million bucks in the business because they can see the value that's been built to this point and also where it can
Mm.
go. um yeah, it's I
And it's
appreciate you
interesting
saying that, but
hearing Dave speak.
I do want to pass on
No, no, but
that was more
it's
by
interesting.
inspiration.
No, Case, but it's interesting hearing Dave speak now, because he did, I went to your stand when he was doing a few talks and stuff like that.
Oh yeah, right,
It is
yep,
so good to hear how he speaks about the business, which is his perspective of you, but it comes out differently, right? So it's still your similar messaging and stuff like that, but the way he positions it and places it is his interpretation of it
yep,
comes
yep.
across really well. And I think having that almost circuit breaker from the founder to another CEO who comes in with a fresh pair of eyes, looks at the business differently, and probably sees things that you don't see, and actually
That's
blind
exactly
spots
right.
that you probably had. Yeah, he actually
Right.
really, I think, has driven the business forward in a great way, and the timing, it almost probably, and this probably sounds weird, but I think sometimes when we get ill or we have those sort of breakdowns, it's almost because like someone can look after it now. You probably almost had that happen to you because it's like almost a let go after doing capital raising and actually having someone in place. And sometimes your body goes, oh, we can sort of fucking relax now. It's like when you go on holiday after you've just worked your ass off and you just
There's,
sit for a week, or
there's
2
probably
weeks.
there's probably some element of truth in that. Like the timing. What I will say is that the it made dealing with it way easier. And
Mm,
like I communicated this over and over again to Dave and to the team. It's like this is actually this is the best possible time for this to happen because I'm not
yeah.
worried about. You know what I mean? It's one of those ones
Mm,
where it's like I'm always concerned and thinking about and like and ideating all those different things, but in the sense of like, no, it's in good hands.
mm,
Like I can just focus on this and everything's going to be cool. Like I genuinely
yeah.
felt that as I was dealing with the health stuff. So yeah,
Mm,
that's a pretty good place to that all worked out really really quite well
yeah.
actually.
But
Yeah.
it's
I
sort of
think
almost, I think, set up that your body relaxes, right? It's like, oh, I finally got it. And it's like, okay, now you can deal with this shit now that you've been avoiding, Case. Here you go.
Maybe, maybe.
But like I can say 20 years ago, I filmed replacement of an aorta valve in open heart surgery. So having stood on the other side of it, watching the chest being cracked,
Yeah.
watching them
Yeah.
reroute your heart through a machine, and I
Yeah.
remember the doctor, the surgeon, going, "Watch the heart rate monitor. It's going to go to zero in a second. It's really cool."
Yeah.
And then the amount of it, yeah, it's a crazy operation. So recovering from that. How
It's
about yeah,
It's a lot, that's for sure.
it,
It's
it
one of those
is.
ones where, like, kind of looking back on that because I had to go back in a month later for basically emergency surgery for a complication from the surgery itself. So like looking back through all of that, I'm like, that was, I'm sort of in the middle of it feeling like I'm driving with the handbrake on, but then looking back, I'm
Mm,
like, that was a really huge deal. And to be able to have that support from the company and support from everyone around it to be able to take care of it, it was pretty amazing.
yeah.
That
Try to keep it up
culture
there.
is one of the things that kind of it drives me a bit nuts around cyber. The fact that it's really, really hard wherever we are to embed this, in everyday life and in business life. And that was something you
Mm,
tackled with bug bounties. So, like I said, I
mm,
was running around the world for so many years telling stories and stuff like that. It was a fantastic thing. But when I arrived at Cyber about 2019, it was starting to get impact, but there was still a lot of resistance to this idea. So how did you go about reshaping that culture and especially kind of getting, now the top end of town really understanding the value of bug bounties?
Yeah, with great difficulty, with a lot of swag and
Swag.
party. Like, I say that kind of jokingly because it does sound funny, but the idea of one of the first, it was actually the first Black Hat DEF CON that we went to just after we'd raised our seed round. There was like 7 or 8 of us in the company, and we're like, okay, how do we let people know we're here? So I had this idea of basically trying to create a t-shirt that would be appealing to the hacker community, but also appealing to the practitioner and the CISO community. And that's where the "my other computer is your computer" t-shirt came from. So, and then we just printed 1,000 of them, and by the end of the week, it looked like 200 people worked for Bugcrowd. It was great. But like,
You got us last year at the CyberCon as well. I think Dan Maslin and I got dragged into stand with our orange Bugcrowd
I mean,
sunglasses and stuff as well.
that's like a 13-year-old design, and it's still
Yeah.
like cranking strong, which is awesome.
Yeah.
But to your question, right? This is not diverting off into swag stuff. Like, what that did was it created this opportunity to basically get the CISO side of the conversation peering over the fence at the hackers and vice versa.
Yeah, smart.
And that's from like a community management and even from like a brand development standpoint. That's actually been kind of a hidden, because everyone's like, oh, you're just doing that to be cool and whatever. And for sure, it's it's getting the brand out there, all that kind of
In
stuff.
case you just said I've always been cool. It's not. Yeah, it's just
Not really. We just got good at feeling it. Right? The purpose of that was literally to create that rally point for hackers who at the time felt pretty marginalized, to give them something that they could actually rally around that would support them and actually kind of validate their ability to contribute to this side of the market that was basically scared of them. And then at the same time, stoking curiosity on that side of the market so that they come to the table as well. Like that was very much
That's
a
what I'm
part
saying. You struck that balance perfectly. That was the thing that I think I most admired about how you got that, because from your product standpoint, that was the most challenging point. Is
100%.
that that the way you actually, that's what I said, that the balance and the pivot points that you found through your business for what could be quite a challenging product was actually a joy to watch. And there were so many lessons in it. And that's why I think
it's been, and
we
it's
probably need to
more
be a part 2 here. But this is this is something that I think that has been admired, as I said, not just by me but other people in the industry, and the way you've actually struck that balance where it's cool for the CISOs or the purchasers to say at the other end, but also for the hackers to participate, and getting that balance right is that's phenomenal.
I appreciate that. Like it's been like, that's probably, I think the big thing there is that we just knew, we kind of called that out as a part of the problem that we need to solve from the outset. So we were super deliberate about treating that as a first order problem to solve in the business from day zero, and I think that helped a lot. But yeah, Tom, back to your question. I think so partly it's that, it's partly humanization of the hacker, like helping people understand that this is a morally agnostic skill set. It's not necessarily bad or good, it's just powerful, and the bad side of it, but there's a good side that you need to be introduced to, like that education piece. Some of the stuff we've done with Disclosure around getting the law changed, like that's a decade-long project that's like just started to yield fruit over the past 3 or 4 years, right? All these things contribute to the product, which is basically people that break computers becoming more palatable and more kind of normalized, right? I think the other side of it is that just in general, we've reached the point where we realize that we kind of suck at this. Like writing secure software is like writing software that works is hard. Writing software that works and doesn't do all of the things that it shouldn't, while you've got an adversary that's looking for all of those things, like we're really bad at that, but it's mostly because it's a really hard problem. So
and they're working so hard on the other side case. That's the thing, is we're not as collaborative on this side trying to protect the side, and on the dark web they're all sharing and collaborating. Oh, I tried this ransomware kit, but just do this or change that, or here's my phishing kit, I did this, but just change this, or I've run this through AI now and I've actually got the English right, and actually the booking.com tablet looks good, so use this skin. And they work there. But here we're like, oh well, I've got this product, you've got a similar product. We can't work together. And if you fuck
Yeah.
up, then I'm going to go after you and ambulance chase your customers and all that sort of stuff. This is the issue we have on this side too,
I
isn't it?
think I think recognizing, like, the industry's gotten to a point where it is for the better part recognizing the fact that the defender's dilemma is a real thing.
Mm.
And that, to err is human. So, like, that doesn't give you a pass on continuing to be terrible at stuff. It does give you the opportunity to basically become kind of humble in how you approach it. Like Kirchhoff's principle around cryptography: you never build a crypto system that relies on, like, the workings of the crypto system should be able to fall into the hands of the enemy, and as long as
Yep.
they don't have the key, it should stay resilient. Like, that's a
Mm.
resilience principle in cryptography. I think the same thing applies to life in general, for starters, but like definitely AppSec and
Mm.
security across the board. Like, secrecy and pretending that it's not a problem is only going to last so long, because once that is proven wrong, all the dependencies you built on top of it will fail all at once.
Yep.
So to flip it around and say, you know what, let's assume that we've missed stuff. Let's figure out how to get all the brains we can borrow to help give us feedback on the things that we've missed. Let's then mitigate that risk and then learn from that, and then continuously improve at the root level. Like, that's what mature organizations do now. And our model ties directly into that. The whole reason I'm passionate about vuln disclosure is that it literally forces the organization to think in that way. It's like, all right, if a kid in India can tell me that there's a vulnerability and I'm going to volunteer to listen to that, that tells me that I'm not perfect at this stuff. And then it just kind of resets the organizational thinking around, like, there is no such thing as 100% secure. There's just economically rational in how you approach resilience. Now, what are we going to do about that, right? So that's
I love
that's
that.
all a work in progress, right? But I think those two things, acceptance of the supply side and then proper understanding of the nature of the actual problem that we're solving here, I think we've come a long way in that. And that was always sort of my thesis going into this. It's like red on blue. It's ultimately about symmetry of resourcing and economics between the adversary and the defender. Like, if you can get that part right, assuming the rest of it's okay, then you're in with a shot of staying ahead of them. So yeah.
Yeah, that's good. And what about look forward, Tommy? It's probably time for one last one, but we're looking forward from where we sit today, Case, and you sort of touched on it. We're in interesting times at the moment, but
Yeah.
from sort of this point forward, we're looking, sort of end of April, and been obviously a change of government, with Biden out now and Trump in.
Yep.
There was a different flavour, and there always is with change of government and different feel in America. They do sort of sit on the pulse pretty heavily, and California obviously a lot different to other parts of the country there. But what do you see from your position sitting there, but also in the go forward position in the next sort of 12, 18 months or 24 months in cyber, and what should be happening and what you think might happen?
Gosh, you keep on asking these, like, oh, like, let's compress all the universe into this
Yeah.
questions.
You got 3 minutes.
Yeah.
There is, I mean, I think the biggest shift in the US in general, domestically, on the tech side, is basically just removal of all of the brakes and the safety belt and the airbag and all that other stuff. Particularly when it comes to AI, but just across the board, I think there's a really strong imperative towards just running as hard and as fast as possible towards, like, technological and manufacturing supremacy. And safety and security is sort of seen as a bit of a drag on that.
Yeah.
So it's I think the whole thing around going fast is going to get a lot more push over the next 12 to 18 months. The flip side of it is that, like, the international relations environment is deteriorating pretty rapidly.
Yep.
As Aussies, like, we've been aware of that, I think, for a lot longer than it's been publicly talked about here in the US. But some of the stuff that I think we've been concerned about for a long while is starting to become popular
Real.
thinking over here and real at the same time. So this idea of,
Yep.
like, economic espionage, like potential cyberkinetic pre-positioning, like all those sorts of things, like, those aren't theoretical anymore. They're actually
No,
starting to
it's
happen.
real.
So yeah, I mean, there's a lot to talk about. There's a lot to work with. And then you've got, AI in the middle of it all as this pretty much I think, fundamentally transformative. Like, we'll look back on AI in 2025 in 10 years time and talk about it as a thing that completely changed the way that we interact with compute, like, writ large.
Yeah.
I think there's going to be a lot more hype between now and then. So I think I'm sort of trying to separate that part out. But I do believe that it is fundamentally transformative as a technology. So there's all of these like black swans circling the lake, and then there's all of these opportunities and things to get excited about. It's just a whole bunch of variables basically piling on top of each other. And the exciting thing for what we do is, like, chaos is a ladder, right? Like, if you can navigate that stuff, if you can try to get your arms around the parts of it that are most important to you as an entrepreneur, a founder, a leader, a CEO, whatever it is you're doing, and then figure out how to basically, lead, I guess, really is what it comes down to. I think there's a lot of opportunity to take some of the chaos and create value and better solutions from it. So, yeah.
Well said. Yeah, that's the next $1 billion question. So I think there might be a part 2 to this one, mate. I think if
Oh,
you,
look,
if you
100%.
time,
I
but yeah,
think we're going to have to dive into, exactly, you're removing the safety bag, we're removing the, the seat belts and the airbags, and there is going to be consequences of that.
I spend a lot of time in
Human
DC and
biases.
didn't even really touch on that. So there's a lot. Yeah, there's a lot
Yeah.
of things to scratch the paint off there as well.
All right,
But
well,
yeah.
thank you so much,
Part 2 coming.
Casey. Yeah, thanks as always, Jason. And it's a
Thanks,
shame
mate.
to wrap this up. So much good stuff, but we'll get you on again in a couple of months, and we'll rip this wound open even more and dive in. So, thank you both again for joining us.
Thanks, Tom. Thanks, Casey. Appreciate it, guys.
Cheers.